Welcome back to the fourth video on how I use Photoshop for drafting patterns. In the last video I began to draft the initial framework for an upper torso block, in which most of the techniques used for drafting were described. In this video I shall be speeding things up a little so we can get to the end of the block drafting, and only slowing things down at stages where I need to describe something new. In this next phase of drafting, we will begin to see the block take on shape, in which we include such things as neck openings, shoulders and sides, and darts for the back, bust and waist. I will talk about darts a little later when they begin to appear in the block. So continuing on with the drafting, the next lines of instructions are providing the information I need to draw the front neck opening. I'm just using the ruler tool to measure what I require and dragging in guidelines to temporarily mark the measured locations. I am then using the brush tool to permanently mark the location as a point and the type tool to label the point. With the front neck opening, I am introducing the first curved edges of what will form the outlines of the block. To draw curved lines, we use the pen tool. We click, hold and drag our mouse on our starting location. Rather than this just producing an inactive node, which is what our starting and end points of a line have been so far, it produces active nodes, that is, starting and end points that allow us to manipulate how a line begins and ends. What we will see is that as we click, hold and drag our mouse, two lines will emanate out from the node. It is these lines that will allow us to manipulate the kind of line we want to produce. So, for the front neckline, I have started on point 3, clicked, held and dragged out to the sides. Then on point 13 I have clicked, held and dragged up or down. Now at this stage we may not obtain the line we desire, but this is okay. We then select the Direct Selection tool. We can then use this tool to isolate our nodes, our starting and end locations of a line, which will reveal the manipulation guides of both it and any neighbours, and then by clicking, holding and dragging on any of the endpoints of the manipulation guides, we can alter the orientation of how our line starts and ends, as well as introduce curvature. At this stage of drawing a front neck opening, while I do know the angle for the curved neckline at point 3, then it needs to come in horizontally, so I make sure my manipulation guide is dragged along the horizontal axis. I do not know the angle for point 13, as this depends on shoulder angles and back neckline factors. But this is okay. These are all things which remain open and can be altered later. So at this stage, all I am looking to produce is a nice looking deep arc. When I come to draw the back neck opening, I first need to draw the 0 to 14 and 14 to 15 guidelines. These are drawn just as straight horizontal and vertical lines. So here I am using the pen tool. I click on point 0, hold down the shift key and then click on the point 14 location. And then while still holding down the shift key, I click on the top edge of the block. This does not join the line to the top edge because that belongs to a separate layer. Referring back to the instructions for point 15, I then use the ruler tool to establish its true height. Using the Direct Selection tool, I drag a box over the endpoint of the vertical line to isolate it, click on it and hold, then drag the corner point down to the true height. This time for the curved edge, I use the pen tool again, but this time I click, hold and drag on point 0 to one side because I want my line to start horizontally. And here I can use the underlying grid or any dragged in guidelines to help me orientate things properly. Next, I click, hold and drag on point 15. But just as with the front neckline, I am not sure as to what the true angle here should be. But I do know from experience that this curve needs to be more shallow than the front version. So while our neck curves are not perfect, they suffice for the time being. The next lines of instructions are all about drafting the back shoulder, and for this I am going to need my protractor, but as shall be seen, if you haven't drawn one of them, it doesn't matter. The instructions inform me that I need to draw a line from point 15 that is half the width of my shoulder width measurement. For me, this is 6 centimeters. But also that this line needs to be angled at 23 degrees down from the horizontal. The slope of most people's shoulders from the bottom of the neck to the top of the arm is around 23 degrees. Some people have squarer shoulders, meaning the angle is less, while others have steeper sloping shoulders, and so the angle being greater. These are things we can accommodate for if we need to, but we also require extra measurements to draw them. But in general, a slope of 23 degrees suits most of us. Different block drafting instructions may not mention this angle, but will provide different means by which an angle close to it will be achieved. Now, one way in which we can attain this angle without a protractor is to first draw a horizontal line, for me a 6 centimeter one. Then using the move tool, I click on one end, go to the angle box and type in 23. This orientates the horizontal line to the angle we desire. If we wanted the angle to go in the opposite direction, sloping down to the left, we would enter minus 23. Once this act is confirmed, we can then click on the highlighted box around the line and then freely move it into position on our draft. The next line forms part of a shoulder dart, and this needs to be drawn square to the 15 to 16 line, that is, at 90 degrees to it. In the video I am using the protractor to achieve this. I place the center of the protractor on 16, then rotate it until the 0 line aligns along the 15 to 16 shoulder edge. I can then use the 90 degree line for drawing the 16 to 17 line. Without a protractor we do the same as before, only this time we first draw the line vertically. Using the move tool we click on it and then in the angle box enter 23. So the line has moved 23 degrees from its vertical orientation, just as the shoulder moved 23 degrees from the horizontal. Once more, we move the line into location. Continuing on with the other half of the back shoulder, I apply the same techniques for its drafting. As this takes shape, we begin to see our first dart appear. Darts, basically, are triangular gaps we introduce into our block. We can think of a dart as a missing slice of pizza. What they do is they introduce three-dimensional properties into any garment we want to make. For instance, if our garment was like a pizza, during construction we would bring the two sides of the missing slice together. This would see the apex of the dart elevate upwards from off our work surface. In other words, we have introduced volume into our garment that helps accommodate more contoured regions of the body, its hollows and prominences, such as the tapering in or out of the waist, the fullness of the breasts, or, as in the case here, the arching of the back in the shoulder blade region. Just to interrupt myself for a minute, at this stage for the 17 to 20 line, the instruction says that this needs to be the same length as the 17 to 16 line. But rather than make measurements for this, we can simply make a duplicate of the 17 to 16 line by dragging its layer down to the new icon symbol. Then using the move tool, move the center point to point 17 and then pivot in the line until its top point touches the 18 to 19 guideline. So in the drafting of the shoulders, while they look more complicated to draw in comparison to the overall framework we drew in the previous video, all I have been doing is using the ruler tool for measuring distances, dragging in guidelines to mark the locations, using the pen tool to draw the lines, the direct selection tool to manipulate nodes, the endpoints of lines, in order to make adjustments, and the move tool to position and pivot the line. Okay, getting back to those darts. Now at the front, the kind of dart we create here is to accommodate the prominence of the breasts. The method employed in the instructions for achieving this dart is where we first draw a full shoulder line, 13 to 27, set at 23 degrees. We are then told to make a copy of both it and the 12 to 13 line, which we then pivot on bust point 12. This opens up the dart gap. But how do we know how much gap we need? In other words, what should the angle be between the two sides that form the dart? This way I prefer to use my own block instructions than anybody else's. With other authors, their manuals are marketed towards more conventional clothing. Typically, this means loose-fitting styles such as shirts, blouses, jackets, coats, etc. And with such garments, we do not have to be as precise in our dart sizes as when we want to produce garments that either sit flush to the body or are skin tight. The reason for this is because some of the volume needed to accommodate breasts is already included in the ease of the garment, that is, where some measurements, mainly circumferences, are increased in size to create that looser fit on the body. As I like to produce blocks that will allow me to produce skin-tight fits, I employ different methods that allow for more dart precision. Now, one thing we are really informed about in any pattern drafting manuals is why our drafting can sometimes fall apart. That we have taken all our measurements as accurately as possible and have followed the instructions to the letter, but still we end up in trouble. Our blocks looking nothing like the accompanying illustrations to the instructions. That regions like the armhole can look squashed, that certain measurements cannot fit without becoming warped. The most common reason for this is that all instructions we come across only tend to work best with the smallest breast cup sizes. Cup size or breast size is the difference between our underbust circumference and our bust circumference, to put it simply. Differences of between 12 cm to 14 cm gives us a starting cup size, which here in the UK is cup size A. Now don't go getting this all mixed up with your bra labels. Bra labeling systems such as 34DD also account for other things. As the difference between the underbust and bust circumferences increase by 2 cm increments, we go up a cup size each time. So a difference of 14 to 16 cm is cup size B, 16 to 18 cup size C, and so forth. Now the reason why our drafting can sometimes fall apart is because instructions only work best for the smaller cup size A, which is the global average cup size. If you have a larger cup size, typically from C and upwards, you often need a slightly different set of instructions. With the block I am drawing, the person has a cup size A, so I'm okay. But if she had larger breasts, I have instructions to produce any size without us running into drafting issues. Okay then, what on earth is a block? What is this thing I am drafting? A block, by the way, is also known as a sloper in places like the USA. Just need to interrupt myself again. We have got to a stage where I'm drawing an armhole, which you might also hear being referred to as an arm sky, the eye of the arm. When we draw armholes, we want to try and make our life easy when it comes to the endpoints of the curve. In the case here, that is points 21, the outside shoulder point, and point 11, the side point of the upper torso, just towards the back of the armpit. By easy, I mean we want to ensure that the angle at which these points begin starts square, that is at 90 degrees, to the 20 to 21 shoulder line and the 9 to 11 side edge. Our underlying grid will help us out here. Pick the pen tool and click and hold on one corner of an underlined square and drag the mouse out towards the right. This will reveal the manipulation guides, aligning them along the horizontal axis of the underlying grid. While still holding the mouse button down, press the Option key on a Mac, and possibly the Alt key with Windows, and move the right-hand manipulation guide downwards to align along the underlying vertical axis of the grid. So what we see are the manipulation guides forming a right angle, a squared corner. Repeat this for the opposite end of the line. Using the Direct Selection tool, we can isolate each endpoint to position them on the relevant points 21 and 11. We can then click on the circles of the manipulation guides and tinker around with them, extending or contracting their influence upon the curvature of the line taking shape. If we hold down the Option key, or possibly Alt key with Windows, while doing this, we can pivot both sides of the manipulation guides without disturbing the angle we formed between them. For the front armhole, I have simply made a copy of the back armhole. Gone to the Move tool, gone to Edit in the top bar menus, gone down to transform path, and then down to flip horizontal. I then position the endpoints to points 10 and 24, and make any relevant alterations for the armhole curvature through using the manipulation guides. Okay, getting back to what a block is. A block is the starting point, and it does not refer to any garment as such, which I'll explain about in a second. Instead, a block refers to a region or regions of a body. So here I am drafting a block that represents the upper torso region of the person I took measurements from. In this block I am drafting, I have not altered any of the person's measurements. I am being true to them. But we can have different kinds of blocks. That is the as such bit. Blocks where we might decrease the size of certain measurements so that the blocks are more suitable for stretch materials and so for skin-tight garments. Or blocks where we might increase certain measurements so that the blocks become more suitable for looser fits. Increase them a little for closer fits such as tailored shirts. Increase them a lot for baggier fits such as overgarments like coats. And we can have different blocks for different types of fit. So for an upper torso block we can have some instructions that use just a handful of measurements and produce very simple fits. And we can have some instructions that use hundreds of measurements to produce more complex shapes, as if we've flayed the skin off a person's body and laid them out flat. That will produce the most accurate fit. The instructions that I am following are like the next stage along from the simple version. They are the beginning of getting a better fit, or what I call an essential fit, where we begin to accommodate more of those hollows and prominences of the body. Now you may wonder, if my aim is to produce some skin-tight garment, then why am I not producing a block which has negative ease? That is where I alter certain measurements to be smaller than the person's body, so that the ultimate garment made out of latex has to stretch. Well, I will be, but if I draw a block using measurements that I have reduced, the amount of reduction to the measurements would have been influenced by the thickness of the latex sheeting I hope to use. The thinner the latex sheeting, the more reduction is applied. The thicker the sheeting, the less reduction is applied. After all, thinner sheeting stretches more, and so can be reduced down more. So to produce a block that is reduced in size limits that block to just one thickness of latex. The block I will eventually produce will accommodate all thicknesses of latex sheeting. This means that no matter what, I can use the block to produce lots of different garments in lots of different gauges of latex thickness. And, as we shall see in a future video, this opens up even more possibilities regarding how we can play around with different levels of compression in different regions of the body, making things tighter to increase streamlining of the body, or more relaxed to help with flexibility of movement. So, blocks represent regions of the body and not garments, but we can have multiple types of blocks for that region. Some of these concern the level of fit we desire, how much three-dimensional shaping goes into the block, and some of them include preparation for the kind of openness we want a garment to have, be them extremely loose, close to the body, flush to it, or smaller than it. Once we have a block, this then allows us to work it towards many different designs of garments we might want to make, add styling, and convert it all eventually into some finished pattern that can then be used to make the garment we dream of a reality. Where are we then with the block I am drawing? Well, all the work has been completed for the region above the bust level, so I am now concentrating on the region below it and introducing waist darts. Now, even with a simple block, also known as a flat block because any garment derived from it will still remain flat looking rather than have three-dimensional properties, such as the one you see appearing on the screen now, there is a waist dart, but this dart occurs just at the sides. By distributing this single side dart to become 3, we are doing a number of things here. Firstly, it takes all the work that a single side dart has to do and spreads its load more evenly around the body, and this distribution results in a softer kind of three-dimensional shaping. It also shortens the side edges, which in a simple block are often longer than what we require. Also, by having more darts, the eventual dart edges, once we convert them from straight to curves, results in less extreme curves that are easier to construct through the gluing method of producing seams. And because just having a single dart, such as the ones at the shoulders, would be more difficult to construct because we cannot include seam allowances, and so the edges have to be joined using an overlaying strip. By also having waist darts, we can merge both the lower and upper darts together, thus separating the front and back regions into two halves each, where now we can include seam allowances to make construction easier. Well, I've got to the end of the instructions I am following, and I have finished my block. I made a couple of errors along the way, misread some instructions, incorrectly measured some distances. So here I am just correcting these, finding the various layers that need correcting, and then using the ruler tool to remeasure things, and the direct selection tool to manipulate the endpoints of the various lines, to put them back into their correct positions. My final act is to redraw all the outlines. As the drawing so far comprises mainly lots of individual lines, redrawing these as a series of connected lines produces 4 distinct shapes, 2 for the back and 2 for the front. At the back, I simply connect points 41 and 17 together with a straight line. As such, I'm connecting the waist dart to the shoulder dart in order to separate the back region into 2. We don't have to do this at the front because both the waist and shoulder darts meet at point 12, the bust point. At the end, I will take these shapes and give them individual colour, fills, to make them more distinctive, and lower their opacity so I can see the underlying grid through them. This act simply allows the individual shapes to stand out more from all the other guidelines that were used in helping us get to this stage. When I draw these outlines, I am using the pen tool, but I am not just clicking on individual corner points to produce the lines. Rather, I am clicking, holding and dragging the mouse to reveal the manipulation guides. I am then using the direct selection tool to adjust the angles at the corner points to form straight lines. This is important, as we will see in the next video, when I will use these manipulation guides to convert nearly every straight line we see into curved edges. So join me next time, where I'll be refining the block and demonstrating how we can move darts into different locations without affecting their function of introducing 3-dimensional properties into a garment.